Fellas, we have got to talk about these artifact mods because they are going to make some of your favorite builds absolutely nasty. Today, guys, we're going to be doing a breakdown of all the artifact mods, what they do, the numbers surrounding them, what they synergize with, and having this information is particularly important for us when we start build crafting. Now, the mods we're not going to be touching on are, of course, the self-explanatory ones, that being your anti-champion mods and your siphon mods. Instead, we're going to start with our second column artifact mod, Kindling Trigger, which reads, Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants. This one's a doozy, man. From our testing, though, this perk seems to apply 25 stacks of Scorch at base, which on its own gives a nice little bit of damage over time. Now, keep in mind the wording of the artifact there. Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants, meaning this is only against enemies that are unscorched. So you can't lay on the trigger to apply more Scorch stacks with this artifact mod. You would have to wait for the enemy to be unscorched before you can trigger the effect again. Now, from our testing, you can in fact use this artifact perk to help trigger an ignition. In this specific example, while having Ember of Ashes, we found that we could ignite Carl by shooting our solar weapons, then scorching him with either like an incendiary grenade to reach those max stacks of Scorch to then give us that explosion. Now, you heard that right. Kindling Trigger does benefit from Ember of Ashes, which brings its Scorch up to 40. Now, just some clarity on Scorch real quick, because I know it gets kind of confusing when we're talking like burn damage, Scorch. Burn damage is the damage you see that's being done, the damage over time. Scorch are the actual stacks you apply to enemies, whether that's through Solar 3.0 or weapons that apply Scorch intrinsically. And the goal is to get to 100 Scorch because that will trigger an ignition. Now, with that little recap out of the way, how does this mod work with weapons like Skyburner's Oath or even Prometheus Lens, which can intrinsically apply Scorch to enemies by simply shooting them with those weapons? Well, it doesn't stack, as in Skyburner's Oath applies 10 stacks of Scorch with Ember of Ashes, and Kindling Trigger with Ember of Ashes applies 40 stacks of Scorch from any solar weapon. When combining Skyburner's Oath with Kindling Trigger and Ember of Ashes, on that very first shot, we are still only getting 40 stacks of Scorch. Now, that's still great. 40 stacks of Scorch, that's amazing. I mean, you're essentially eliminating 4 shots from Skyburner's Oath, meaning the start point for reaching that ignition has been moved, requiring you less follow-up shots with Skyburners to reach ignition. Now, a couple things to note about this mod. It does not work inside of PvP. Doesn't apply burn, doesn't apply Scorch stacks, nothing. Now, the other purpose of this mod is allowing weapons that don't have Scorch application to then apply it. So weapons like Vex Mythic class can apply Scorch, and most notably that burn damage, which is just going to net you more damage overall, which by the way can greatly feed into some of our Solo 3.0 fragments. Now, keep in mind, after you apply that first shot from a weapon that does not have intrinsic Scorch to begin with, that's it. As in, this artifact mod will not allow that weapon to give you or grant you an ignition. You can still get an ignition, but you'll have to do it by other means, as in your solar abilities. So that is the rundown there of Kindling Trigger. I know it's kind of confusing. I hope I didn't confuse you more with this. We are going to be making tons of builds with this artifact though, so I'm sure as time goes on, I'll get better at explaining how this mod works. But hopefully this is a good start. Now, moving on to our next mod, Blast Radius. Rapid final blows with rocket launchers and grenade launchers grants armor charge. Now, this mod provides 1 stack of armor charge after killing 2 or more enemies within roughly 1.5 seconds. Now, typically you'll need to do this in one shot since the reload will be too slow to get the second kill off in time, but most grenade launchers and rocket launchers should do this with ease. We also noticed that this mod seems to have trouble with wave frame grenade launchers and chain reaction from time to time, as it would not always register the enemies killed and wouldn't provide the expected armor charge. Now, the perk doesn't state that it has a cooldown. However, we found that if you wait a second before firing your next shot, you'll get that armor charge more consistently. Now, this is not the most meta of artifact mods, but it will pair very nicely with builds, taking advantage of armor charges. Considering so many of our armor mods just got nerfed, things like melee kickstart, grenade kickstart, utility kickstart, they now require you to have at least a single armor charge to activate. So this is something that can help with that. Next, we have Origin Perk Specialization 1. Now, I know this is kind of a self-explanatory mod, not the first time we've seen this, but the mod reads improved benefits provided by Sundering, nano munitions, and nanotech tracer rocket origin traits. Additionally, weapons with these traits are always overcharged. Inside of PvE, this gives a 20% buff to our nanotech tracer rocket origin traits, which are found on our Neomuna weapons. Now, the hand cannon epical integration also takes advantage of this, as well as even the nano rockets found on Quicksilver Storm. Now, nano munitions is a new origin trait this season, which is found on our reprised Vex offensive weapons. This origin trait reads, being near allies slowly builds up a partial emergency ammo refill for the next time this weapon runs out of ammo. Now, emergency ammo amounts increases with time spent near allies. Now, from our testing, the artifact mod seems to reduce the activation time from 3 seconds down to 1.5 seconds. Now, as for Sundering, this seems like it's going to be the origin trait found on our upcoming dungeon weapons. So unfortunately, we don't have details on that yet. Now, the only reason I'm really including this artifact mod in our testing here is because weapons with nanotracer rockets are really good, especially Quicksilver Storm. Considering Quicksilver Storm got a buff this season with the auto rifle buff, it just keeps getting better, man. And keep in mind, these weapons are also overcharged in certain activities, giving you yet another 25% damage buff. By the way, if you haven't checked out our exotic pre-post testing for all exotic weapons, we talk about everything, including Quicksilver Storm. We'll have that link down below. Now, last for our second column mods, we have From Whence You Came, which increases ability damage to taken and scoring combatants. This is roughly a 5% damage buff to our abilities that does seem to stack with other damage enhancing effects. Now, this brings us to column 3, which is some of the best artifact mods this season. First up, we have Flint Striker. Rapid solar weapon precision hits and rapid solar weapon final blows grants radiance. Now, through our testing, this perk seems to scale with the weapon archetype you're using. For example, it takes 7 to 10 precision hits on auto rifles and SMGs, depending on the archetype, 3 to 4 shots for hand cannons, and 2 precision hits from bows. Now, the beauty of this perk is that it's basically radiance on demand for both PvE and PvP, as long as you're hitting your shots. Now, while it won't help that initial time to kill, having that 10% boost for your next gunfight could definitely help a ton. Obviously, this synergizes much better if you're on a solar subclass, but you don't have to be if you don't want to be. The only thing you need is a solar weapon, but we're going to get into that later as we work out some nasty PvP builds. Now, speaking of radiance, this brings us to our next mod, Torch. While radiant, you deal increased weapon damage to combatants affected by strand and stasis debuffs. Now, those debuffs are Unravel, Suspend, Sever, Slow, and Freeze. And in our testing, it showed that Torch added a flat 5% weapon damage buff on top of the 25% buff that you get from Radiant, totaling out to be 30% more damage for your weapons. Now, granted, I know it doesn't seem that substantial. 5% is 5% though, guys. You'll have to weigh the pros and cons of whether or not you should select this on your artifact. Now, conversely, our next artifact slot is actually one of the best available this season, and it's in the 3rd column and not in the 5th. Heart of the Flame. Casting your solar super grants nearby allies radiance and increases the damage of your super for each nearby ally. Now, the first part of the description is kind of whatever. Don't get me wrong, radiance nice. The big portion of this artifact mod though is that increase in super damage. Now, we tested this a bunch. Turns out you need an ally within 15 meters of you. Now, I want to mention that we further tested this, and turns out this artifact mod scales based on the activity and how many fire team members you have present, essentially capping out at 5 diminishing bonuses unless Bungie brings back 12-man activities. That bonus caps out at 19.21%, assuming that you have everyone within 15 meters when you activate your super. This is a substantial buff here, guys, in our damage. This mod is an absolute must-have for this season's new dungeon, and supers like Celestial Golden Gun or Star-Eater Blade Barrage, Pyrogale Hammer, or even Dawn Course Dawn Blade are going to be absolutely nasty with these mods. Finishing up the 3rd column, we have Wished into Being. While your super is nearly fully charged, ability Final Blow spawn Orbs of Power. Wearing Season of the Wish armor decreases super amount threshold. Now, the wording of this is a little confusing, so we tested exactly where that threshold was and how many orbs you get. With no Season of the Wish armor equipped, that threshold seems to be around 85% of your super meter, or right where that line divides the big ammo number and the reserve ammo number. Now, once your super is right around there, any ability Final Blows will spawn 3 Orbs of Power one time, topping off your super. Now, each piece of Wish armor lowers that threshold roughly 2%. So a full set will proc this effect around 75% of your super. Now, this works in both PvP and in PvE. And yes, I think this is going to be very useful in high-end content like GMs, but even in things like trials and comp, where snagging an ability kill will get you those orbs, which can make all the difference in getting that super. I cannot stress how good this artifact mod actually is, guys, especially for exotics that already regenerate your super. With Wish armor, you'll be able to lower that threshold down down even more, which means if you got an exotic already giving you 50% of your super back, you really only have to work for 25 to 30%, which means pretty much non-stop supers. Now, rumor has it that this perk is currently not working as intended and will continue to generate these 3 orbs every 3rd ability kill after your super is full, as well as proccing on things like glade projectile kills and caster frame sword kills. It's most likely unintentional, but it's worth noting at the moment. Now, moving over to our 4th column artifact perks, we have Unraveling Orbs. Picking up an orb of power grants strand weapons unraveling rounds. This gives our strand weapons unraveling rounds for 5 seconds, and you can refresh it by picking up another orb of power, and you can actually extend that duration to 7 seconds with threads of continuity. Now, we have a similar mod back in season 20 called Allied Unraveling, where you needed to get rapid final blows, and back then, guys, we had this mod on pretty much at all times. It was such an easy way to get unraveling rounds. What I'm really curious to see is how this is going to synergize with our new strand exotic bow. That's the bow that can do the suspend thing, looks really nasty, and we believe it's tied to an exotic quest. Regardless though, a great mod for strand weapons. Up next, we have Pillar of Ice, which is our first stasis artifact mod here, which reads, defeating encased combatants spawns stasis crystals. Now, to activate this, all you need to do is freeze a target, then kill them, and they'll spawn a stasis crystal upon death. Similar to like Headstone, except a precision kill is not needed. Now, this will pair well with pretty much any stasis build. And before the season started, we theorized on a stasis Titan build that's all about crystals. And we're definitely going to be trying that out here soon. Something very cool is that it also works with Headstone. If you freeze a target, then get a precision final blow, upon death, it will spawn 2 stasis crystals. Now, there are tons of stasis weapons that come with Headstone. We also have a new legendary trace rifle this season that's stasis. And don't forget that Wicked Implement got a rework last season, which Catalyst offers Headstone now too. Now, there's actually some nutty stuff going on with stasis. Some wombo combo activity is back. We'll be jumping into that very soon. Next, we have Revitalizing Blast. Causing damage with solar abilities weakens champions and bosses for a short duration. It's a 15% debuff that lasts for around 6 seconds. And even though 15% debuff doesn't seem like a lot, this is great for solo players, right? Especially solo players that don't want to rock Tractor. It's not as big of a debuff, but it's something that's nice and it ties into your ability loop. Now, finally, rounding out column 4, we have Dragon's Bite. This reads, breaking a combatant shield with strand or stasis weapons has a chance to suspend or freeze that combatant, and wearing Season the Wish armor increases this chance. Now, from our testing, when you do not have Season the Wish armor equipped, this seems to be somewhere around like 5 to 10% of a chance at suspending or freezing the target when you break their shields. Now, it's hard to tell exactly without numbers from Bungie, but it was not super consistent. However, each Season the Wish armor seems to escalate this chance by roughly 10%. When we had a full set of Season the Wish armor equipped, we were proccing this effect every other shield break. Now, I know Suspend got nerfed last season to not last as long, but it's still good, as well as the freeze. The beautiful thing is the synergy that it can have with those 2 subclasses, as well as exotics like Dagger Scepter, Wicked Implement, the new Strand Bow we're about to get, which will offer even more synergy. Now, this brings us to our final column. First, we have Horde Shuttle. Damaging unraveled targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a threadling. This is functionally the strand version of Pillar of Ice, which we just talked about earlier, except you're spawning threadlings instead of crystals, and you just have to damage the targets, not kill them. Now, this synergizes really well with Unraveling Orbs, as you'll be able to pick up an orb, grant yourself unraveling rounds, start debuffing left and right while spawning threadlings. Now, threadlings are going to be spawning about as frequently as they would with the perk Hatchling, maybe even a bit faster. And just like with Pillar stacking with Headstone, Hatchling will stack with this mod. That's right, guys, you'll spawn 2 threadlings if the enemy is unraveled and you get the precision kill. Now, while this isn't as flashy as some of the other mods, it'll be a nice addition for any strand build, especially in activities where ad density is a bit higher. Now, our last stasis mod in the artifact is Hell the Storm. Shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deals increased damage. Shattering stasis crystals releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. Now, this will be active at all times that you're running a stasis build or breaking stasis crystals in general, and increases the shatter damage from frozen targets and crystals by about 7.7%. Now, this stacks on top of things like Whisper of Fissures, boosting shatter damage to about 46.15%, and works, get this, in both PvE and PvP. Additionally, when you shatter a crystal, they release shards that damage and slow, dealing an additional 34% shatter damage and applying 10 stacks of slow. Like I said, guys, we're gonna have some stasis builds for you very soon. This mod just brought back Shatter Dive 2.0. Now, I hope you're ready, because when you combine this mod with Touch of Winter, it allows you to get those kills pretty consistently. consistently. But this is a great artifact mod though for your stasis builds, guys. Definitely take advantage of it. Now our last solar artifact mod is called Rays of Precision. While Radiance, solar precision final blows cause combatants to ignite. Now this mod is pretty straightforward, but by God is it fun. And again, the beautiful thing is you don't even have to be on a solar subclass. Granted, you probably want to be. It synergizes with Ember of Char, Ember of Eruption, Empyrean, and essentially anytime you have Radiant active, whether through your own means or your allies giving it to you, any kill with a solar weapon or ability will cause the enemy combatant to ignite and blow up. Again, guys, any kill with a solar weapon or ability. And the thing that really makes this exciting is that it works with your abilities. So for my hunters that want to lean into those throwing knife builds this season with the Video Spade, it synergizes beautifully here for those ignitions. Now our second to the last mod is the one we first saw during Season the Seraph, and that is Solo Operative. While you are the only member of your fire team, you deal increased damage to all combatants. Now this mod is especially nice, especially for my folks trying to do a solo dungeon, but it gives our Guardian a flat 15% damage buff to everything. Supers, abilities, weapons, you name it. Now the catch is in the name solo, meaning that this is only active when you're completely alone. However, for folks doing lost sectors, solo, or attempting solo flawless dungeon runs, or just running around the rest of the game solo, this mod definitely should be in your loadouts. Now rounding out our artifact is a mod that actually used to be in our arsenal back when Charge with Light was still a thing pre-Lightfall. Argent Ordnance. Firing a rocket launcher consumes 1 stack of armor charge, granting increased damage and reload speed until you reload or stow your rocket launcher. Now this mod is interesting as it works with both exotic and legendary rockets and provides a stackable 15% damage buff to your rockets whenever you have an armor charge. Now each armor charge allows you to fire 2 rockets before the charge is consumed, which means if you're rocking 3 charged up mods, you can have up to 12 rockets stacking with this mod, which by the way, stacks with things like surges, radiant buffs, you name it. Now Argent Ordnance buff also applies to Gallahorn and its Wolfpack rounds, meaning your damage here can just continue to climb. This is a must-have for damage phases that allow rockets. Now before we finish this up, something to note for my solo players is that this does stack on top of Solar Operative. Crazy, I know, but I need you to know this. Your rockets with Solar Operative and Argent Ordnance will be doing 30% more damage. Take this knowledge, fellas. Go out into the world and dominate that dungeon solo. That wraps up everything for our Season 23 artifact. Now keep in mind that these numbers and effects are from our own in-house testing, and there might be interactions or synergies yet to be discovered. If you find anything else, be sure to leave a comment down below and let us know how you're feeling about this season's mods. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.